Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, I'm Hillary Dickman. I'm the Senior Assistant Director of Admission for Marketing and Communications at Colorado College, and I'm also a parent of 2 college students.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of 2 daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. This week in the news, Jill and I will discuss an article, How to Solve Campus Parking Problems Without Adding More Parking. It's by Daniel Kenney. It came out in March of 2024, and it's in the Chronicle of Higher Ed. Hillary's back, and we're discussing a question from a mom from Connecticut. She sent in via SpeakPipe, who's concerned about paying for college. And we'll have our final segment with Rick Clark from Georgia Tech, and he shares how to get accepted and not be a jerk about it. Good morning, friends. A couple quick announcements. So first of all, we're only 3 episodes away from episode 500, and we want your voice to be on that episode. We call you our listening family for a reason, and we want it to be sort of a family celebration. So will you please go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, click the orange button, and share a tip that you've learned about college admissions that's helped you, that you would like to share to help another student, to help another parent. We want this to be a special episode, and you kind of have this parasocial relationship with your listeners when you have a podcast. And I don't know, something's exciting to me personally about having the actual voice of some of our dedicated listeners on what is a historic episode 500. So are you willing to share to help out another student, to help out another family? You can be anonymous, and if you're willing to share, we do need you to do this by January 10th in order to meet our production calendar deadlines. Thanks in advance to everyone who is willing to share of yourself to help others. Now, the second announcement has to do with Counselors Connect. This is our support group, our professional development group for college counselors. If you've applied for that, and almost 100 have, you should have an email letting you know if you were accepted, and a lot of guidelines. It has the whole calendar for the whole year of all of the meetings. It has some basic information that Michelle and I, my co-leader, we think will be helpful for you. And so if for some reason you did not receive an email, please reach out. I'm going to give you my direct email because I've been having some issues with Gmail for your college bound kid. So just mark at schoolmatch4u.com. Mark at schoolmatch, 4u.com. If for some reason you did not get that, make sure you check your junk email. Sometimes it may go to junk, but you should have an email with clear direction and guidance. And we're excited to kick it off on Sunday, January 26th, less than 4 weeks away.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
We were talking before we came on, we're happy to talk about this article. We've had some rougher ones in the last few weeks, but it's a topic that we have not talked about at all. And so I thought it would be good to have an article on something that we've never talked about at all. And, the article has to do with campus parking. And it is by Daniel Kenney. Came out in March 26, 2000. Well, a while ago, actually. How to Solve Campus Parking Problems Without Adding More Parking. And why don't you take the lead on this, Julia? What were some of the things that were your takeaways from this article?
Sure. Well, I think the article opened with, and I love this line, I can't remember exactly what it was, but that, at any college, faculty are not always aligned as a group, except when it comes to parking.
Yes, it did say that.
And I think even if you work in K through 12 education, you also feel this. I'll tell you, even my current school, I have to park 5 minutes away to get into, because there's just no parking. And I get it too. Like, I've worked on college campuses, I've lived on college campuses, right? So, and a lot of the time, I don't know about you too, Mark, but sometimes my students do ask in their tours, can I have my car on campus? And that's a common question. So clearly it's going around. Obviously, all campuses are a little different, but no matter what, you're still having the same issues, right? So you could have a rural, small liberal arts school, which you would think would have more space for parking, but then that really encroaches on sort of the look of the campus. And then also maybe some of the people who live around campus don't like that their space is getting encroached on, and or if it's an urban campus, that the very limited amount of space that's left continues to get gobbled up by a university, right? Which changes neighborhood demographics, it changes green space, it actually can really gentrify a place, drive up the money. So like, this is actually a pretty big problem. And so the article goes through some solutions, right? Which is just limiting the amount of people who can have cars. But at that point too, they make it like as employee, like, you would be expected. Actually, most states have this policy, which a lot of people don't know, but a lot of states stipulate that your place of employment, part of you being employed there is that you yourself can get yourself to or from. So it's really not on the employer to provide transportation or parking, but obviously you're going to lose out on some students and or faculty if you don't provide some perks. So some schools have gotten, like, I'll talk about Emory. When I was there as a grad student, if I wanted to park on campus, I had to pay over, and this is 10 plus years ago, friends, so I'm going to imagine it's almost twice this now. I would pay $750 a semester.
A semester?
I did not know one.
Semester.
I don't know anyone. A semester.
Wow.
Yes. And I don't know anyone that could really do that. And so what Emory did is provide like a huge amount of free shuttles that would either go to parking areas off of campus that didn't disturb neighborhoods and or just in all the surrounding neighborhoods. So they definitely reference a couple colleges in this article too that do similar things. But then you have to, then the counterpoint to that is, what about professors or faculty or staff that are low income or students that are low income? So when I was in grad school, I was probably one of the only people, me and my best friend, I think we're the only people that actually paid for our grad school. And so I had to I literally worked 4 to 5 jobs when I was in grad school. This is not 40-hour weeks, friends. This is like a job that was 8 hours here, a job that was 12 hours there. But and so I did need to have access to my car at all times because I needed to drive around, right? Or what if you have a family, or if you're a commuter student, there's obviously a lot more parking available, but then you're often paying for that. And, there's a great community college near me. It's $7 a day to park there. And if you're in community college, you probably are not someone who can afford a $90,000 a year college anyways. So I know it sounds really, it sounds like a silly thing, but it's quite big. And it also, parking and availability and access to school does have a lot to say with student success too. So like, kudos to the current school I'm at. The reason I park far away is so students can park closer. And that's because if they're not able to get in class in time, if they're stressed about getting to class, if they're going to go park their car illegally or all of these things, it does not help them learn. Just as it doesn't help people get to their jobs. So it is something that I think every campus struggles with. So you see a lot of blanket, no first year students can have a car, or no students who live in the dorms can have cars. Certain faculty can only have cars, or like in my school, there's tandem parking spaces that you have to. So, but it really is a thing because it has a large economic repercussion, and it can have repercussions for retainment in terms of enrollment and employees.
Yeah, it's constant complaint when I visit colleges and start talking to students.
Totally.
And I ask them what they would change if they were in power. In fact, I hear it so much that when people say it, I'm like, okay, can you come with something else? Because that's like everybody says that about parking. Now,
Yeah.
so why is it such a thing? Well, think about how much space it would take up, and how much land that is, and what the cost would be. And the article talks about the fact that like most colleges don't have, whatever it is, whether you want to call it the courage or you want to call it, they don't have the leverage to actually charge people what it would actually really cost when
Right.
for those spots. So it's a money loser for them. The article also talks about the tension with the surrounding community, and they don't like to see all these parking garages popping up all over the place.
Right. Understandable.
Yeah, so you get blowback there. And it just talks about all the cross pressures of students demanding more parking, but they're not really going to want to pay for it if we actually charge them what it would actually cost.
Right.
Then there's stuff like pollution, and should we be doing more bicycles? And it talks about initiative. One of the fun thing about being in California is just, man, all those skateboarders and all these people flying by you.
Yeah.
Some of those
on
campuses.
Wheels. Yeah.
Yeah, on wheels. That was kind of fun when I was visiting those schools. But yeah, I mean, that is a big thing, Then the same thing, you're in admissions and you're thinking about your constituency, and you're like, you don't want the question that people ask you, like, can I have a car and whatever, and fresh, like that's a question that you would like to be able to answer positively, because you're trying to not have barriers for people to enroll. So there's lots of cross pressures coming at schools, and it's kind of a huge source of consternation and debate that goes on behind the scenes and in ways that people don't even think about. And so I'm like, we're coming up here close to our 500th episode here, and I'm like, we've never talked about the campus parking problem.
Yeah,
maybe we should. Yeah, it's a real deal. It's a real deal. It's a real issue. What are your thoughts on suggestions? I mean, not that people would listen to you and me anyway, but
yeah, and I think, and maybe we have seen a lot of colleges really try to get creative here with so some that are mentioned in the article too. So sort of a system of which people who do need to be on campus, have their cars on campus, do get their cars on campus, and then the vast majority, who don't need to, do not bring a car. So that also requires, investment on the university's part to potentially provide public transportation off campus that brings you to a lot of major places. Also cutting down on the need for a car in the first place. So for traditional sort of residential four-year colleges, you're providing shuttle services to the mall, to the grocery store pretty often. Then, or sort of a tiered system where, like, listen, if you really need a car, you're going to need to pay a little bit more. And then these spots will be available to you, or you're going to have to walk really far if you feel like you need to bring your car to campus. I also really like the suggestions of just making the campus more walkable. The article mentions this, and I'll say anecdotally, I've also seen people have cars that really just drive them for like a 5-minute walk. So there is also there's also a convenience level that is beyond the basic necessities here. But making your campus more walkable so people are less likely to do that. I will be honest with you. Even my college, as much as it was a small liberal arts, it was about 200 acres. And senior housing was at the opposite end of the gym, which had a parking garage or a parking lot, right? You would get your car towed if you had it in the wrong spot. How many times was my car towed? About 10 times. But I never had to pay the school, so I would just go bust it out of the parking lot. I'm one of those people. I get it. So trying to also make your campus more walkable, not to say to scale down, but maybe we shouldn't be thinking about uber large campuses where you're going to have to walk more than 15 minutes to get to your engineering building or something like that. But making sure there's lighting, that it's inviting, that it's easy to get around. And certainly we've seen a lot of proliferation, like you just said, Mark, about it used to be that campuses really didn't allow wheels, right? So no skateboards, no bikes, but now a lot of them have their own bike share programs. My own college would just have bikes laying around that didn't belong to anyone. You could just pick it up and bring it anywhere around campus. So they're trying to get creative with their solutions, but the number one solution that they're not trying to do is create more parking spaces. It's not a win-win situation.
One thing the article talked about that I hadn't thought about at all is how the safety risk. So here's
Right.
something the article, it says, we estimate that student injuries or deaths caused by automobiles on campus have occurred at as many as 20% of all colleges.
Yeah.
So there's that component. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, we know someone whose child was hit on campus.
Yes. Yeah. It says, in addition, a dependence on cars promulgates a sedentary lifestyle, a primary factor in more than 25% of all deaths from chronic disease, in the country. And the other thing it said was just how expensive these parking structures are.
Right.
So it said, like, if you build a parking space for like 1,000 people, the median institution loses $400,000 a year if it's surface parking, and $1.2 million a year if it's structured parking.
That's so much.
Yeah, and that's, and this is like serious research by Nakubo that tracks all this stuff, where they track the funding and all of that stuff. So, yeah, and then, the thing is, I mean, this is only exacerbated because we have a housing shortage now.
Right.
And so land's at a premium. A lot of schools are in urban areas, where space is at a premium. And it's a real dilemma. But I think it's something that as a listener, if that's extremely important to you, it's worth finding out, that for. I mean, I'm not encouraging people picking their college off of parking, but I also like people to go in with their eyes wide open and not get surprises when you get there either.
Right.
Yeah. Thanks, Julia.
Thank you, Mark.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Hi, Mark.
I told you I was having you back.
I know. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for continuing to bring me back, even though sometimes I put my foot in my mouth.
Well, not only do you not putting your foot in your mouth, I don't tell you all the times our listeners reach out and tell me how much they love your questions. Literally happened day before yesterday from a mom from Virginia, so I probably need to text you more often and say, Hillary, another person loves your question.
I'm glad to hear it. Thanks.
Yeah. So I'm going to play this question. It's from a mom from Connecticut who's homeschooled. I'll play it and we'll dive in.
Awesome.
Hi there. I'm a mom in Connecticut. I have 2 children, 7th and 9th graders, and we homeschool. Thank you for including homeschoolers in the conversation about preparing for college. I really enjoyed the interview you hosted back in July and found it immensely helpful for my high school planning. We are in no man's land when it comes to family income. We do not expect to receive any needs-based aid, and we are unable to pay $60,000 plus annually for a college program. We will definitely be searching for strong merit aid options in the college search. My question is twofold. First, how do you advise families who are evaluating the cost of college and coming to what the family judges is a reasonable or appropriate cost? I have 1 fine arts student and 1 STEM student, so they will be following drastically different paths in pursuing their interests and career prospects. It seems irresponsible to look at spending $200,000 for a fine arts degree in acting, but at least there's a chance of a reasonable ROI when looking at an engineering degree. At this point, we anticipate having about $100,000 set aside for each kid for higher education. We are unwilling to take on a Parent Plus loan or similar to further fund their education, so they will need to carry any additional financial expense on their own. Second, how do you counsel the students to give themselves the best options for pursuing these merit opportunities? Neither of my kids are underrepresented in any of the meaningful metrics for their interests. As homeschoolers, we will be taking advantage of local community college programs and other outside educational opportunities to validate their education and grades. Standardized tests are on our radar as well. We are familiar with comparing scores and GPA to the upper 75% of a college's enrolled statistics. Thank you for all you do to provide accessible education for families in this arena.
All right, Hillary, I'll start out on this and then you can chime in. So there are several things that jump off the page to me about this question. First of all, don't feel bad that you are not going to qualify for need-based aid and you do not feel like you can afford the SAI when you run net pitch calculators, because you are really in a very large group. I had a family the other day say to me, I feel like I'm in the donut group. This is what the donut group was, right? Like
Yep.
stuck
Yep.
in the middle, like we look like we make too much to get need based, but the amount that's saying that we have to pay, we can't. Lisa's been very outspoken about this before in the podcast. A lot of people are in this category. So first of all, don't feel bad at all about that. I personally do recommend people consider how much they're going to earn when they're looking at how much borrowing they may have to do. It's not precise though, because we know 70% of people change their major, and we know 76% of people are not doing work exactly in something of their major. So it's not precise. I haven't talked about it on here in a while, but I have a fairly conservative formula where you look up first your expected income for what it looks like you'll make based on what you're going into, and the total undergraduate borrowing is 80% of that first year income. Now, I want people to use after tax money. So when I say 40K, I'm not talking about salary, but I'm talking about after taxes are taken out, local, state, city, federal, not after deductions, like if you have like a flex spending account or 401K, not after that, but after your taxes. So it would be 80% of your net pay. So if your salary is $55,000, and after you subtract taxes, it brings you down to $40,000, then $32,000 would be 80% of your after-tax income. And so, you run the numbers. So if it looks like you're going to make $40,000, then that's a $32,000 max undergraduate borrowing, and that's what I recommend in my book. And then I also say if you have no idea what you're going to do, then use the federal direct income cap limits as your max. So that, if you don't know what I'm talking about, students are automatically guaranteed the federal direct student loan, either the subsidized or the unsubsidized version, and it caps out at $27,000 over 4 years and $31,000 over 5 years. It's not meted out in $6,750 equally all 4 years. It's $5,500 freshman year, $5,500 sophomore year, $6,500 junior year, $7,500 senior year. Now, who knows? New administration, who knows what's going to happen? Some of the things I'm talking about might change, you have no idea. But for now, that's the way this works. So that's a default for, in my counseling for people that have no idea what they want to do. But I do think, it's funny. I was talking to someone I used to work with who had $45,000 of undergraduate loans. So that's more than you can borrow. So that meant that she had to either take out private loans, or some schools have school-based loans. This is in addition to the federal direct, or there was a Parent Plus and there was an agreement. The student would pay part of it back. Like, these are all different things people do. But she had a high income job, and she was like, it was no problem. I paid it off in my first 2 years, talking to her. So it was like, she's like easy peasy. So, but that's because she had a high paying job. Like, you turn around and she didn't have a high paying job. So I do advise that way. So I would say the first part, Mom from Connecticut packed a whole lot into this question, and I'll comment a little bit later about how you get merit scholarships and what you should be thinking of. But I'm tired of my voice, Hillary. Anything you want to say so far?
Yeah, I just want to sort of affirm, Mom from Connecticut, that I think it's totally reasonable to be considering what your student might make for a salary when they get out, even though we know that they could change their mind. Maybe you could even say they're likely to change their mind. I think you kind of want to go with the worst case scenario, right? And I guess that's true for both of your students. I also think it's reasonable to say, I'm not interested in taking out Parent Plus loans, and to have a really straightforward conversation about, here's how much, like, we want to partner with you, but here's how much we can afford to give you each year, or afford to put toward your tuition each year, just in terms of cash flowing or pulling from savings or whatever. I think the earlier that parents can have those conversations with their students, the better, because it really just sets kids up for disappointment if they don't have those conversations early on in the process. So I think it's really smart that you're thinking about this, and totally reasonable to be setting some boundaries with your student. And I also have the same question that you had, Mom from Connecticut, about how to look for merit scholarships. That wasn't really part of the process for my own students because we did qualify for aid. And so when I'm talking with students now, I don't have great advice for them when I know some of our peer institutions that give really good merit aid, but beyond that, I don't know a sort of thoughtful approach to looking for schools that offer great merit aid. So I'm looking forward to hearing you talk about that, Mark.
Yeah, and I just want to make one more comment on the first part of from Connecticut's question. And some of your longtime listeners may have heard me say this. Haven't said it in a while, but I generally am not a fan of Parent Plus loans. I'm not. I don't like the high origination fee. I don't like the high interest rate. I don't like the fact that you can qualify one year and then not qualify the next year, and then your kid is really in a jam. That can happen. Even that they just look at adverse credit history as opposed to debt to income ratios. Like, you could have, some things that could have happened in regard to that. And I just find most people are not maybe where they may need to be for their retirement. And there's no like Parent Plus loan or federal direct loan program, anything like out there for that. And it's not selfish for you to think like about that as a person. I don't like to see it when I go to a fast food restaurant or something. I see a 70-year-old working there, and I know that's somebody that didn't prepare, and has to odd job it or something, working a greeter at Walmart or something. And I know sometimes people do things just to stay busy and stay active, and can't always be judgmental like that, but you get the point. So I'm not a fan. I never say never, because there's situations that may make some sense. Let's say it's senior year, it's only going to be 1 year, and we just can't quite do it. Or I'm big on, you actually run the tables and you look at what you're actually paying monthly, and you run it, and okay, it's only going to be $130. Okay, yeah, it's a little higher interest rate, but we can totally handle that. So there certainly are circumstances where it can make sense, but my advice in general in most instances is, if you need to take out a Parent Plus loan, you're living above your means. In most instances, I believe that's true. So in most instances, that means that you need to be looking at more affordable options. While I recognize that there are exceptions. So that's kind of that first part. Now, as far as the scholarships go, so there's a lot I would say here. The first thing is you want to focus on institutional money. I was literally just talking with somebody yesterday who I'm working with in the Midwest, and they brought up the scholarship question, and they referenced how their older student, won a scholarship, a local scholarship, which was great, but it was $3,000. And $3,000 is great. Who would want $3,000? And I literally said to them, well, let's talk about how many hours they worked to get that. We ran the math, and it's like that would be better than any job they would have gotten. So that was actually a good ROI. However, $3,000 was a drop in the bucket compared to what they needed for college, and the overwhelming majority of outside or external scholarships are 1 year. I want to encourage you to go back and listen to this interview. Well, it wasn't an interview. It was just a recording that Julia and Laura did, mom and a daughter, on outside scholarships, talked about working together as a tandem to win outside scholarships and how it was great that they did it. But, I mean, that's someone that won more outside scholarships than anyone I know in terms of the number. It was 14 or 15 that she actually won, and they were great. They totaled 27,000, but she said 2 of them were renewable, 4-year renewable. So
wow,
it's like, go back.
2.
Yeah, the majority of outside external are not 4-year renewable.
Yeah.
So with institutional money, I direct people there. Over 80% of the scholarship money out there is institutional. So that's just where you can normally get, sure, there's like the 3,000s are out there, but there's a lot of 10, 20, 30 full tuition. Let me make it sound like there's crazy numbers of full tuition and full cost of attendance, but they're out there. And there's lots of 10, 20, 30, 40. There's a lot of that out there. And so first I would say you want to focus on institutional. And then most schools are fairly transparent on their scholarship section of their website, which is usually subsumed kind of under the admissions tab. They're pretty good at revealing, what scholarships they have and a basic sense of the criteria. Now, you'll find the complete range, just like there's colleges that admit by the numbers or do formulaic or, an admissions grid to award admissions just based off numbers only, transcript review, transcript test scores. Like, there's scholarships out there like that, and you'll see them. Tennessee, Alabama, a couple examples are listed literally on their website. You can go in and you can see this type of academic profile gets this, and this type of academic profile gets that. Those scholarships are on one hand, it's good because it's so predictable. You kind of know exactly where you are. I literally was talking to a student of mine. Well, I wasn't talking, I was texting the mom earlier today. And she was saying she's 20 points away on the SAT from full tuition.
Wow.
Yeah. So she's taking it, blah, blah, blah. We're going over like the scholarships that she has so far for her schools. And so there's schools out there like that, and they're straightforward and they're clear. Then there's other schools that are more like admissions holistically. They read files holistically. They make scholarships decisions holistically. So they're harder for you to predict if you're going to get it or not. And in those cases, there may be, an interview involved. That's a very common thing. Schools will have scholarship weekends, or they'll use your first application reading as the first cut. And you don't do anything, just apply. And then admission officers like Hillary flag people and say, I want to nominate this person for scholarship weekend, scholarship day. They've changed a little bit since pre-COVID, post-COVID. Like before COVID, this was get everybody back on campus. And it was also a big yield activity, right? And then all kinds of activities, panels, all kinds of different things. But one of the very common things is an interview. I look at Miami. Miami's really big on that for years. In Florida, Coral Gables. And so those you don't know how much you're going to get, but there'll be levels. There'll be a few superstars that get full tuition or full cost of attendance. Then there may be like a tiered thing. And maybe a few people get 30, 20, 10, that kind of thing. But remember, these are renewable for all 4 years as long as you maintain a decent GPA. So you have to look at the amount you're getting and times it by 4. And then realize this is after-tax money. And then not everybody does interview weekend. Some people have an additional essay or two that you have to do. So those are a little harder to predict what you're going to get. But the websites do a very good job of spelling out what the award levels are. So at least you know what you're competing for. And, you need to just start right away at looking at each school and figuring out, schools tend to be pretty transparent about this. Are we giving all our money away on the basis of merit? Are we doing none of it? Is it all need? Is it some merit, some need? Websites are good for that. We use College Aid Pro with all of the families we work with because they've got a really nice section there. What our families like about College Aid Pro is once you pull up any schools of interest, it gives you a projection of what you're likely to pay, and then has all the scholarships listed. So you can see what they all are, because that saves a lot of the leg room of running around. You can see them all right there. You can see how much they are, what their criteria are. And they have like several people on their team that just mine for these and update them all the time. So, one of the things I encounter a lot as a counselor is I'll have a family and they'll, I have to get into people's financial business just because, I'm trying to make a financial match, right? It's not because I'm trying to be nosy. In fact, I even have a section. It's like, okay, if you do not qualify for need-based at all, then you don't need to fill this out. But if you think you might, I need to get a sense of what you're going to qualify for. So let's say it comes back and it says you're not going to qualify for aid. And then I also ask people, like, what's the most you're willing and able to pay? So let's say I have someone that says $50,000. And then all of a sudden, when I ask them the schools they're interested in, I see all these $70,000, $80,000, $90,000, $100,000 schools on the list that give no merit-based aid. This happens all the time. or where you're at, Hillary, that has a little, but you
Yeah.
don't have a lot. You have very little, right? At CC?
Yeah, very little merit aid, you mean?
Yeah, very little
Yeah.
merit aid. Then I have to have the conversation with them
Hmm.
and say, okay, you told me you like Georgetown. You told me you like Northwestern. You told me you like Carnegie Mellon. You told me you like
And that you only
Ivies.
want to pay 50,000.
Yes.
That's not
Like,
going to happen.
well, this
if you don't have
conversation
need.
happens every week. This is like
Yeah.
this common, right? And then I take people through a process. Now, the thing about it is, no, this will surprise you or not, Hillary. You'd be surprised at how many people say they'll pay 50, but then if it comes to this school, they say we'll find a way to make it work.
Yeah.
That happens all
we hear
the time.
that a lot from parents. And in fact, like I actually asked Julia for help with a parent program that we were running this summer. And I just needed some advice on like, what do I need to tell parents as they're working through the process? And one of the things that she said was tell them not to tell your parents, or to tell them not to tell students, I'll pay for college X, but not for college Y, because of how hard that can be on the student if then they don't get into college X, right? And so, like, I get it that there are some that parents think they get all like starry-eyed about some schools and not others, but the likelihood of your student getting into the colleges that make you feel that way is pretty low, and so that's a lot of pressure to put on your student, I think. And I also think that there are so many fabulous schools out there. Like thinking about what Mom from Connecticut was asking about with the arts programs. There are amazing schools out there that are regional schools, like regional state schools that have amazing arts programs that are either not that expensive to begin with, or that are going to offer merit aid to students with decent GPAs and test scores. And I think broadening your search enough to be able to include some of those schools will really help. But that also means like you can't be snobby about the brand name, right? Like those two things are not going to go well together in this kind of search.
Yeah, so many times people are forced, to make this very hard decision for people. What matters more to you? The brand name, and I don't. I feel like that's a little pejorative, just call it the brand name, because the brand name, what the brand name means for a lot of people is a better opportunity that they feel will lead to better outcomes. That's how they'll process it mentally.
Yeah, and I think there are sometimes legitimate reasons, like additional supports or whatever, that are available from those schools that are going to be hard to find other places. But I also think that if you're the kind of parent who's listening to this podcast, your student is probably well situated already in terms of having the kind of support that they need at home to be successful. And so there are fewer reasons to need the sort of boost that you get from a brand name.
Yeah, and once again, I'm not putting that down, because sometimes people are, hey, this school has this connections, and look at this average ROI, and sometimes they might even go into some of the data and see average starting salaries, mid-career, this, that, the other, and they feel like, okay, it's worth it for that. So, but the dilemma that people have is their money or name recognition, like two things that matter a lot to people, and now they're pitted against one another, and it's an excruciatingly hard decision for them. Julie and I agree 99% of things, but I would have a slightly different take with her on that question before. I think it's hard. I think it's almost inevitable that people will say if there's something they think is more valuable than something else, they're willing to pay a little bit more for it. I feel like I couldn't really, if I told my families, they just wouldn't listen to me anyway, because they would they would just feel like, well, I think this school does have more value, so why would I not pay a little more? So I wouldn't necessarily take that on, but what I would say is you really need to really think through how much you're willing to pay in advance. And one thing I always challenge people on is students don't always like it when I hear it, because I say it right in front of them. Paying for college is assumed to be a joint responsibility of the student and the parent.
Yeah.
It's assumed. And I tell people, as a student, you can bring 12 grand to the table pretty easily. You take out the federal direct student loan, the one loan that I am comfortable with. There's $67.50 right there. You work 10 to 15 hours a week during the school year. which the research shows people have higher GPAs that do that anyway. There's another 3,500. And then you make 1,000 over the summer that goes to college. I get not all your money has to go for college. Yeah, I get it. There's money there for the beach trip. There's money there for the hanging out with my friends at restaurants and stuff. But 1,000 goes to college. Right there, you got 12 grand. A lot of times, just when I can get people to buy into that, it can actually put them in a much different situation. Because, like, say I have a family that comes to me and they say, like, the most I can pay is 35, and I want to go out of state, or 30. And I'm like, that's really hard to go out of state to a lot of the schools that people are interested in at that price point. But if we can get you into the 40s, there's a whole lot of places that can come into play.
Yeah.
So anything else you want to add to this, Hillary? What were your takeaways on the scholarship part? See, you were like, yeah, Mark, tell me the answer.
Yeah. I forgot about College Aid Pro. I don't know how, because I've listened to that. I've kind of looked through their website on my own also. I guess just not having used it for my kids, I forget that it's out there, but that's a great resource. The other thing that I was going to say, just thinking about loans, one thing that we notice with families who enroll at CC is oftentimes it'll be the families who have higher income who are willing to accept student loans, and more of our middle or lower income families who refuse student loans. And they're the ones who really could benefit it from it, like from a cash flow perspective. And I think that what you said at the outset about taking out minimal or sort of the federal max, right, of student loans, ending up with like $25,000-ish in debt after 4 years is pretty reasonable. And that we have, I think when we think about student loans, sort of because of the politics of our country, we don't think about those minimal student loans. We think about the people who are really like stuck under, $80,000 or $150,000 or whatever in student loans, or who took out student loans and then came out without a bachelor's degree. And so I would just say, like, if you hear student loans and it just makes everything inside of you want to run the other direction, to try to come at it from more of a data or an analytical kind of perspective and think about how much the school would actually be asking you to take out, and how realistic it is that your student would be able to pay it off after graduation, rather than just having the knee-jerk reaction of like, no, absolutely not. Because I think what you're saying about that $12,000 a year, part of that includes student loans, right? And it does open up so many more options when you can make the jump from $30,000 to $40,000 a year in total cost of attendance for a student. So I think that's one thing that can sort of be helpful to keep in mind also.
Yeah, and part of the reaction here is people have sometimes been burned themselves, meaning,
yeah, absolutely.
I'm still paying mine off now and I'm in my 40s. I do not want to saddle that with my kids. So that's like the reaction. So there's neat, reflexive, allergic reaction to anything with the L word. The L word is the 4-letter word.
Yeah.
Right? And so one thing I sometimes say there, and this is people just thinking about their kids. I don't want to put my kids in a situation I did. If it's a federal direct loan, student loan, I'll tell them, well, you take it out. It's going to be in their name, and you can split it, paying it back if you feel like, and interest rate varies every year on that loan. So I can't give you the exact amount of what your payback's going to be. But let's say it's around $320 for 10 years. It's around that, somewhere around that where the current interest rates are right now. So then I say, you do $160 each. And, if this is a last kid, you are not having all of these expenses anymore, paying for college, everything. And so all of a sudden that's better than you doing a Parent Plus loan or another one. It's going to be a cheaper rate. And so there's creative ways that you can approach it. Now, let me say something else about loans. And this is very complicated and very nuanced. I totally get someone saying, we're not doing loans. As I said, this often comes from a place of being burned by inordinate student debt. And certainly every family has a right to say, we're going to community college instead of doing loans, or we're going to a regional public, or our student will live at home to save on meals and housing. Or best yet, we've got enough money saved up and we don't need loans. But sometimes the $5,500 to $7,500, that's the annual amount that range for the federal direct student loan that a student may have to take out, can really open up some great opportunities that in the big scheme of things are worth it. Sometimes I have to challenge a family and say, have you ever had a car payment? Have you ever had a mortgage? Well, this is a loan. So if you're willing to take out a loan for a depreciable asset like a car, why are you so opposed to investing in yourself? And once again, that does not mean everybody should take out loans. This is very nuanced. I go on to say, I presume you took out a car loan or a house note because having a car or home is important to you. Well, education is transformational. So if you value education, just be open to a small loan. And please don't group all loans together. Like Kimberly said, there's a big difference between $25,000 of debt and $100,000 of debt. I'm not a fan of private loans or Parent Plus loans in almost all instances. I am a fan of state-based loans, school-based loans, and the federal direct student loan if it's a modest amount. It can be a great investment in yourself. I'll share a story about my daughter, Joy. Joy took out loans to get her master's degree in clinical mental health counseling in NC State. And now she has this incredible job at UNC Chapel Hill, working with the Keenan Flagler business students. She would never have got that without her master's degree from NC State or her grad assistant job at Duke, which kind of put her in the education field. And you know, Joy goes on an international trip every year. Every year, the Keenan Flagler business students. I mean, this is the kind of trip that she goes on that literally costs probably $15,000 to $20,000 for you to pay for it. I mean, they go for a while. They stay in incredible accommodations. This summer, she's going to Thailand. Next year, she's going to Norway or Finland. She has incredible benefits, a very good salary, and she absolutely loves what she does. She goes to work every day and loves it. And none of this would have been possible without student loans. So I'm aware of Dave Ramsey and some of the teaching out there regarding student loans, but sometimes you just need to bet on yourself, especially in modest amounts. And if you say you value education, don't be afraid to take a modest loan out there, just like you do for a car or a home. There's one more thing I want to say that I want to reinforce something that's really important that Julia was saying to you in that advice. It really is important not to signal to your kids, this school is valuable and this isn't. Like a lot of mental health damage is done there, and it's done all the time, and parents don't even realize they do it. And It's not their fault because selectivity rates have just changed so drastically since when they went that they don't even realize what they're saying when they make little comments about, this school versus that school. Like it just doesn't even compute with them, because when they went, University of Pennsylvania in the early 80s, half the people got in.
Yeah.
1 and 2. So like if you see someone that went to an Ivy League school and they're 60s or older, it really wasn't that hard. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it was easy to get into Harvard, Princeton, or Yale, but it's nothing like it was now. Mm-hmm. So that impacts how parents think. And then they get all the mailings too.
Yep. I also think it's a different conversation to have before your student applies versus after they've received their admit letters, right? And if your student is admitted to University of Puget Sound and Stanford, and you're like, well, I'll pay for Stanford, but I'm not paying full price for Puget Sound. Like, okay, you can say that now because your student got into both of them, but don't say that on the front side of it, right? Where your student then feels like they're being expected to be admitted to Stanford, and no one should be expected to be admitted to Stanford. So I think it's a little bit different if you are willing to be more generous once you've received admit letters versus kind of making those judgment calls on the front end. Those are two different conversations.
You reminded me of something that I really needed to say. There are a sizable number of schools that work off of a model of high tuition discount, right? And basically what that means is that they're concerned with their price being too low because they think people will think they're not that good of a school. So they really watch what their competitors price their school at. and they price it there, and then they give significant scholarship money to every applicant. And this is not an additional application. Your admission application is your scholarship application. And there's schools doing that for, some of them are doing it for north of 30 for every kid.
Yeah.
You know, in the 20 to 30 range is not that uncommon at all for every kid.
Yep.
And so, you know, I talked a lot before about, like, one model is scholarship by the numbers. You have the GPA, it's clear, it's transparent, it's there. Look at the website, you hit it, you get it. And then I talked about more the holistic method, you know, and that could be anything from scholarship weekend, reading essays, additional steps. There's this other thing, which is everybody gets it. And this is why I always tell people not to look at sticker price, you know, right? Net price, because someone could say 85,000, there's no way. But, 55, I can do that. And in some cases, everybody gets that 30. So anyway, hopefully this was helpful. Thanks, Mom from Connecticut. Oh, there's one last thing. I keep thinking one last thing.
Another one last thing?
Yeah, this is I promise is the last one. No, I know none of our listeners believe me, but anyway, for good reason. So there was a statement in there that none of my kids, do you remember the wording of it, Hillary? There was some statement, and it may not have been exactly like this, but none of my students are underrepresented by traditional metrics.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to say that, you know, very few scholarships are linked to being underrepresented in traditional metrics, like very, very, very few. So, so you should not see that as a deterrent for your ability to access the wide swath of scholarships that are out there. You know, it's mostly based on either they're automatically given, which is a large number actually, are auto aid scholarships.
You're talking about institutional aid right now, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Large number either automatically given, you know, or they're given because, you know, your student will be stronger in our applicant pool than most of the kids that we get, and we want to incentivize you to come, and we think we could lose you to the competition, and we want to incentivize you. But it's nothing to do with being underrepresented, the overwhelming vast majority of them.
Yeah, I think it's easy to get those mixed up because when you look at outside scholarships, there are lots of outside scholarships that are for a very, very specific group of students, right?
Yeah.
Like my family is, we have Italian heritage.
Yeah.
And so my girls were looking at some Italian American scholarships, and you had to be from a specific high school in New Jersey and be Italian American. And it had to be your, you know, grandmother on your dad's side who came from a certain town in Italy or whatever. And we were just like, oh my gosh, like that is much more specific than we can get. But when you're thinking about merit aid that comes from the institution, that especially, I think, after the Supreme Court decision, those are not going to be tied together because we're not even allowed to like offer special packaging of our financial aid offers to students of color that we wouldn't offer to white students, right? So it's going to be really rare to find institutional aid that's tied to being an underrepresented student.
Yeah. So that's just so don't be discouraged by that. But Hillary's right. For the external or outside ones, the benefactor gets to decide that, and the benefactor can have come from a certain place in Italy, and that's who they want the money to go from, and they can set whatever the rules up however they want them. And so, you know, and you'll find that. And by the way, I don't want people to hear me saying it's not worth pursuing outside scholarships. We've done huge segments. We did 4-parter with Carlin Green on that. We did a webinar with that. Then we had Julia and Laura come on. It absolutely is worth it if you have a smart strategy. Like I said, like if you turn around and look at your hourly rate, it's better than any job you're going to get if you know what you're doing. But that needs to be the secondary strategy. That's the supplemental strategy to try to get, an extra 5,000, 10,000, 15, maybe 20. And some of it also depends on the applicant too, because there's talent-based scholarships out there that extraordinarily talented kids can compete for on the national level. But anyway, I said one last thing, and I'm already starting to push it. So thanks, Hillary.
Yeah, thank you.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, the last 2 weeks we've had part 1 and part 2 of our special interview. This will be part 3, which will be the final part of our interview. Listen and enjoy. So do we want to transition to accepts?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's have finally some good news, right? I mean, yeah, people may be, if they're still listening to us, they may be so beaten up they've checked us out by now. So let's get to some good news. Let's get to some good news here. So, one of the things I loved, and you just said it so succinctly when we met over lunch. You said, you can get accepted and be a jerk.
Right.
and so why don't we start with that? What are some things to avoid, when you're admitted?
Yeah. I mean, that's right. And we unfortunately see this online, you hear about it, sort of sometimes unfortunately see it in person, but kids will get in, and it's awesome to be excited, and they should be celebrating that, but also cognizant of, the fact that especially for some of the schools that do have these more selective rates, like there's a lot of kids around you who did not get good news. And, what we just talked about earlier, like maybe they're in that day or two period where they need to process it, and they're going to be fine. But they're going through that hard spot. And so, one of the things we try to actually communicate to the kids we admit is like, continue to be a good community member. I mean, the reason that we admitted you is not because you have a high test score, not because you took a bunch of AP classes or made good grades. It's because we see something in you from what you've done and who you are and what you wrote about. That means you care about other people. You want to make this world around you a better place. And this is a good opportunity to do it. I mean, if empathy and caring and concern for others ever has a place, I think as a high school senior, maybe it's right around this time of year. And then again, in that March, April time of year, to just encourage people. And sometimes you've got to, sort of just be mindful and cognizant of the others. And there will be plenty of time to celebrate and an appropriate place to do that. But I do think that students should really keep that in mind. That would be one thing. The other thing I would say is, to just be also aware of how you do that online, in social media.
Yeah.
I mean, part of me feels like there's so much to be said for, and over the years we have really encouraged students to share that they got in. I mean, honestly, sometimes I just sort of ebb and flow a little bit on that, though, because while I think it's cool, and the reason we do it is because we want sort of build excitement around our new class, and I think that's where the intent comes from with colleges. When I really think about the way that might play out in other people's actual social network, I am of two minds. And I think that's up to the student individually to sort of find the appropriate way to understandably celebrate. And then also, just again, be cognizant and mindful of how that's going to impact people they care about, that they are connected to online as well.
Yeah, I'm in the camp of not doing the online celebration because it's right now. It's just incredible how connected kids are.
Yeah.
Somebody puts something up online and everybody knows it like in 30 minutes or less. It is like it's almost seems the equivalent of telling them. And I know people are well intentioned, but boy, it can be somebody else is really going through what for many kids is their first experience of what they regard as failure.
Yeah,
and so it's just tough. Working in a boarding school environment, it was so tough. Because as much as you put the word out to people, no running down the halls, no celebrating. Inevitably, word got out, and everybody kind of knew what happened to everybody else. And boy, it was really painful for people that. Your best friend or good friend or even an acquaintance just got rejected while you got admitted. And I don't know. I think people need to really be humble on the celebration side. And I think that extends to online right now. That's just my opinion.
No, I mean, it's true. And I mean, we won't go into it too much, but these are conversations that we've absolutely been having for, do we break a little away from maybe what we've done in the past? Again, good intentions create excitement around a class and a new community, but maybe there's a different platform to do that on,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. And another thing you brought up, which is really important when you talked about be a good community member, be a good citizen. You want to comment, Rick, on sort of some conditional language that can be in admission offers about you continuing your academic performance and not completely tanking? Anything you want to share on that?
Yeah, I'm actually on a listserv with people around the country who are at public universities. So admission directors at public universities, we have our own listserv on that. And inevitably around this time of year, you'll see that like, hey, can you share your letter with me? Because I want to sort of look at our language around making sure you keep your grades up. Which is obviously one of the big ones. And then also kind of behavior, discipline, that kind of thing. So those are, in general, those are the two biggest. All schools are going to ask for final spring grades. And, in at least anecdotally, in talking to colleagues from around the country, the number of rescinding offers, so pulling back offers because of major kind of egregious grade drops and just really punting that spring semester has gone up a little bit. The other thing is, we always encourage students that are admitted early, if you're going to make a major change to your schedule, so not even worried about like performance, but thinking about schedule. So, the schools admit you. And this would be especially true for some schools. And there are some, really good schools who make decisions really early. I mean, you're getting schools sometimes putting decisions out in October, November. They didn't even see your final fall grades. And so if you're making a course change, that's also really important to communicate to the school that's admitted you, to say, listen, I was taking BC calculus, and I'm ideally you do it in advance and you say,
Yeah.
But,
Yes.
But I am thinking about switching to X. Like, is that going to have any bearing? Sometimes you get it, I have switched my major to, but that's the type of conditional language that you will see in admit letters. And it's important to read. Like, they're going to expect that you maintain generally the schedule and performance, as well as the sort of conduct that you exhibited and on which they made that initial decision.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's really, really good. And just congratulations to all the students out there, admitted early. And for those of you who were not, lots of time ahead of you here. And we wish all the students nothing but the best as we wind up this year. But before we wind down, Rick, you've heard the podcast a few times. You probably know I like to put people on the hot seat and ask a few personal questions just to let our listeners get to know you a little bit more. So,
okay.
Why don't we start out with what's your favorite food? Oh
man, I just chips and salsa. I like to keep it simple, or just chips and guacamole. But man, I buy stock in Tostitos because I spend a lot of money on them.
There you go. What about best book you've read in the last few years?
Oh, let's see. That's a good one. I've been rereading Pat Conroy recently, and I read both My Losing Season, which is about his years playing basketball at the Citadel, and then also reread The Lords of Discipline, about being at the Citadel and sort of those college years with friends. So just on a little bit of a Pat Conroy kick here lately.
Good. I get great books from this section, and I also get great ideas from this question. What favorite place to vacation?
Favorite place to vacation. So my parents have a house in Cocoa Beach, Florida, and nice. Man, it's just a simple little town down there, but good food and low key and relaxing and just amazing weather. So probably not so much in July and August, but pretty much any other time of year, it's a great place to go.
Awesome. And let's close it out with best advice for students out there.
Oh man, I think the biggest thing is just to be reminded, like, Frank Bruni wrote a book, said, where you go is not who you'll be. And I think that we in general just put so much emphasis on the name of schools. And I think that students need to be more focused on the opportunities that they're given and just taking full advantage of those. And I don't think it's that hard to believe that's true, because that's really what's happened for a lot of students in high school. I mean, most students did not have a choice as to where they ended up in high school, and they flourished there, and they took advantage of things, and they plugged in and made friends and have succeeded in that spot. And not that we're just going to place you in any random college, but if that were to be true, it's really about the network you build and the advantage that you take of the opportunities you're given.
Even that I have my own book, I tell everybody that book, Frank Bruni's book, in my opinion, is the best admissions book I've read. So the most important book, I think, is just essential. And I can't emphasize enough how impactful I think that is. So Where You'll Go Is Not Who You'll Be by Frank Bruni is like $10 or $11 on Amazon. So makes a great Christmas gift. I tell everyone in my families to read it. So glad you put a plug in for there. And before we close out, Rick, why don't you tell people about your blog, which I really enjoy. I know I started out with Rick's blog. I can't remember how I found it, but it was before we met. It might have been, I'd heard you speak a few times. I didn't remember, but I started paying attention to your blog. I really liked it. And then I found you had an audio version, which I like even more. So why don't you tell our listeners about your blog and let them know how they could receive it as well.
Yeah, well, so the blog is on our admission site, which is just admission.gatech.edu. And you can see it there in the horizontal navigation. And I think the biggest thing to know about it is it's really not about Georgia Tech. It's a lot about the stuff we've been talking about. I try to keep it very general. I try to keep it personal as well. In a lot of ways, people forget that these are humans reading applications. It's a personal human process, and we read applications that way. And so I try to bring my family into it, my personal experiences, just to sort of drive that point home. So I'd love for people to check it out, and that's the best way to get a hold of it.
Hey, Rick, thanks so much for coming on today to your College Bound Kid podcast. Really appreciate it, and it means a lot to myself, my podcast partner, Anika, and all of our listeners.
Thank you, Mark. I've enjoyed it.
On Monday's episode, I will be sharing something that is very important to understand about college admissions, but it's also very confusing. It's confusing for me, so I know it's probably also confusing for you. And we'll have the final part of Lisa's excellent interview with Aaron Llewellyn, the CEO of Tilting Futures and an expert on Generation Z, and they will continue to debunk myths about Generation Z. Friends, your student has to make a lot of decisions about the college applications, whether to include this or not include that. And those decisions come into play in a number of ways. Certainly, your essays, there's a lot of decisions to make, your resume, your activities list. And I want to close with one of the 10 quotes that I selected as my favorite college admissions quotes that I included in the book that I wrote called 171 Answers. And I think this quote can serve as a voice of conscience when you are completing your applications and you're trying to decide, do I include this or do I not include it? So here it goes, and it's by Robin Mamlet, former Dean of Admissions, formerly at Stanford, but she was at a lot of places. I mean, Robin was at Sarah Lawrence and Swarthmore and Lawrenceville Boarding School. I mean, she spent at a lot of places. Even more impressive than test scores or great transcripts or fantastic essays, colleges are looking for authenticity. Not the appearance of authenticity, not the packaging of authenticity, not the strategy of authenticity, just authenticity, plain and simple. So why is that? If they detect exaggeration or pretense or packaging, how do they know which parts of the application are real? Robin Mamlet, former Dean of Admissions, Stanford University. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.